Even as the U.S. resumes talks with Iran, the question to be asked is, just how much damage did those 47 Republican senators actually do? Well, that is just one of several major stories we'll be covering in the hour ahead. A Rise Review begins right now. Hillary Clinton defends her email privacy, but critics are not buying her explanation. A viral video reveals an ugly strain of racism on American college campuses. We'll have the latest on the elections in Israel. Campaigning continues in Nigeria amid new developments in the fight against Boko Haram and financial turmoil. By destroying tons of tusks, Kenya hopes to save elephants from ivory poachers. And we'll report on the long-awaited boxing match that's promising to be a blockbuster. I'm Julian Phillips. Welcome to this, the latest edition of A Rise Review. Let's check out what's making headlines around the world. On the 4th anniversary of the civil war in Syria, a surprising admission from U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. He says that ultimately America will have to negotiate with Syrian President Assad. In Pakistan, suicide bombers hit 2 churches in Lahore. The attacks were timed to strike while services were underway. At least 14 are dead and scores more injured. An offshoot of the Taliban is claiming responsibility. International aid is being rushed to the Pacific island of Vanuatu. The country's president calls a cyclone that hit this weekend a monster. It's one of the worst storms on record in the South Pacific. Kurdish troops battling ISIL in northern Iraq say they have evidence the terror group is using chemical weapons, specifically chlorine gas. Meanwhile, the fight for control of Tikrit rages on. It's now well over a week since Vladimir Putin has been seen in public. Rumors are swirling about the cause of his absence. Some say the flu. Others say he's with a girlfriend for the birth of his baby. Well, even Tehran is saying, what's wrong with you people? 47 senators in the United States Congress sent a letter to Iran to derail negotiations over the country's nuclear program. They pledged to tear up any deal they don't like when the next president takes office. Well, it's a propaganda gift on a platter for the Iranians, no doubt. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says the move shows disintegration inside American politics. Indeed, the New York Daily News and other critics are labeling the Republican senators as traitors, quote unquote, for interfering with negotiations. Well, this all comes as the U.S. and other world powers are at the table, that's the P1+5, working toward a deadline for an interim agreement at the end of the month. Of course, we are fortunate to have with us this morning Arise News senior political analyst James Carville. James, always good to see you here. Is it really fair to say that this letter backfired on the Republicans?
Let's try to put this in a little context. This is the idea of an American named William Kristol, who is what they call a neoconservative. William Kristol was the man behind Dan Quayle, was the person who discovered Sarah Palin, was the chief intellectual architect of the Iraq War. So this fits very nice into, you know, what I would say is every kind of disaster you can think, this guy's like, to some extent, has been behind. And Tom Cotton is 37 years old, brand new senator from the state of Arkansas, same state Bill Clinton is from. And there's no doubt that Kristol and his acolytes went to him and said, this would be a great idea if you send this. As it turned out, it was anything but a great idea.
Yeah, this name is new to a lot of us, of course, here. But Tom Cotton, although he's new, he's a junior senator, as you said, 37 years old. So you're saying he got this directive, this narrative from Kristol?
Well, I said directive, narrative. It was Kristol's idea, and Kristol went to him. He was Kristol was a big kind of supporter of him. He's what they call a neocon. These are, think of the people behind the Iraq War. And these are the same people. There was a very prominent one in Sunday's Washington Post, arguing for a war with Iran. What they really wanted at the end of the day And not every senator that signed that, most of them didn't have any idea what they were signing. It just seemed like a good idea. And at the time, it turned out to be anything but a good idea.
Well, this is part and parcel, though, for the Republicans, it seems. They've come up with certain ideas in the past, or at least they've been shouting loud and long. And here we have a situation here where it seems to indeed have backfired on them.
Well, yeah, it's backfired. And of course it's backfired. But it's just like the Iraq War backfired, just like Sarah Palin backfired. There's nothing new here. I mean, but it's important for our viewers to keep in context exactly what's going on, who is behind this. Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton, would be what I think Lennon or something used to call a useful idiot. He was just a kind of person that they used to get this out, and then they all jumped on board.
Okay, but Cotton's doubling down on this, and in all the narratives that, where he's talking to the press, he's basically doubling down on this. But there's one person that perhaps it is not. Senator John McCain, and he seems seeming to backtrack on this, James, where he says it was all done in a hurry before a snowstorm. Did you buy that?
Yeah, everybody was trying to get out of town, and that Cotton and Crystal and his people passed it around. It was not vetted. They didn't take it to any kind of foreign policy expert. I think McCain, who views himself as sort of a foreign policy graybeard, a kind of senior guy, people were calling him and saying, John, this is a terrible idea. What you're doing, you're setting a terrible precedent. And he was like, I probably didn't think this through. Now, remember, Senator McCain is the guy who picked Sarah Palin.
You went there. I didn't. You went there.
I did. Well, I mean, it's history. We can't. Why deny history? You can't do that. So I think he jumped on this one a mite too quickly.
Here's what I understand. It's a crucial time now for this country. It's a crucial time for politics here. The 2016 election's coming up. Right. The Republicans are screaming loud and hard about all the policies of the Obama administration, what it hasn't done, at least according to them.
Right.
And they let something like this happen. So for me, for Senator McCain to come out and say this all was done in a hurry before a snowstorm, when everything is calculated on Capitol Hill, James, you know this.
Right.
How could they let this happen?
Again, I think that the neocon, Scott the Cotton, he was the kind of new guy. He's got like a war record. He went to Harvard. He's a lot of people think he's the kind of future of the party. And everybody was trying to get out of town, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. It turned out to be a terrible idea. And I think everybody sort of knows it now. Now, he's going to double down. He's not going to say it's a bad idea. And maybe, let me give him, he truly believes that we need, as do a lot of these guys, that we need a war with Iran. That's what they really want to do. And before you say, oh, no, these are the same people that talked George W. Bush into going to war with Iraq.
Right. But if you look at it, though, James, if you read the tea leaves on this and you look at where the public stands, we're a war-weary nation right now.
Right, we are.
And unless there's something that's so compelling, like a video, everybody now is up in arms about ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call them, but unless there's some really compelling information here, how do the Republicans think, or even neoconservatives think?
Is our memory so long that we didn't know that they made up the weapons of mass destruction? Propaganda. If you get a Republican president, which is possible, who has strong ties to the neoconservatives, they'll do what they'll feed them a bunch of stuff just like Bush is and say, we don't invade Saddam Hussein now, he's going to blow up the world with nuclear weapons.
Look,
it's history, man.
And I understand that, but I guess my thing is, as loud as the Republicans are, and we're not certainly biased towards any party here, but I've got to say, as loud as the Republicans are, where is the dog in the fight for the Democrats to bite back against all this stuff?
Well, I don't know that it's the Democrats' job. The president's bitten back pretty hard. He said this should be, I think most Democrats are like, they just keep banging themselves. And, if somebody's destroying themselves, if they're setting themselves on fire, the enemy sets themselves on fire, don't go get a bucket of water, let them go.
In other words, give enough rope, they'll hang themselves.
Right. And I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of Republicans are sort of aghast that they actually did this kind of thing. And And there's some, there are Republican foreign policy experts that say, well, I kind of got a little problem with the agreement, but the president is negotiating something. I actually think it's probably a good idea, but we'll have to wait and see.
Last question on this. Do you think this will actually hurt negotiations that's going on between the P1+5 nations and Iran?
I'm not a diplomat. I
Right.
don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it probably, it might strengthen the more fundamentalists in Tehran a little bit. That because Rouhani's trying to get a deal. But I don't know. I don't know.
Well, this will have to-
Background knowledge.
yeah.
I have no idea.
Absolutely have to wait and see on that. We're going to turn to another subject that you know a lot about. I've been watching you on some of the talk stations across the country about this communications error or glitch, as it were. Some think it is with Hillary Clinton in the email. Look, we've heard her. She came out and basically defended herself. Some people thought it was a good thing. But anytime you come out, you're fodder for the media because you can never ask enough questions. Or, you know, there's never enough. It always brings up more stuff. What do you make of all this?
Look, it goes back to, we start out, and then this is so long ago, but it was the Whitewater brouhaha. It was a brouhaha about Foulgate and travel. It all turns to nothing. Benghazi, waste of time. And so the allegation comes. They said, you got to answer this. Well, it was totally legal. It was actually in accordance with State Department regulations. Well, that doesn't matter. You could have handled it better. And the larger lesson here, it will never stop. It will never stop. And we'll be sitting here and say, well, what she did was actually the same thing that Colin Powell did, or the same thing that Jeb Bush did, but it's okay, but she could have handled it better, or, and I think the truth of the matter is she set this up because everything that she's done in public life, the Republicans or some prosecutors tried to subpoena it. And she probably didn't want them rifling through her personal emails, which is kind of understandable at some level.
Perhaps it is, but here's a retort by the critics. The Republicans are saying Jeb Bush, okay, he's a governor, he's not a Secretary of State. Colin Powell, perhaps there was some private emails, but we're talking about a separate server here.
He had a server and he destroyed all his emails. He didn't keep them, all of them.
Well, how come nobody else is saying?
Because the rule is, there's the rule for the Clintons that. And then there's a rule for everybody else. So if you tell the press, well, Colin Powell did the same thing, they go, yeah, but he's Colin Powell. No, that doesn't matter.
Okay, so you bypass all that stuff, but yet and still, this close to 2016, in your mind, do you think that the American public, because you always hear the Republicans saying the American people, like they speak for everybody, are going to really remember this? What do you think?
Well, the most popular person after Pope Francis in the world is probably Bill Clinton. He's certainly the most popular political figure in the United States right now.
And some say the first black president, too.
They do. They do. You know, there's never been I'm telling you, I've been proud of my kids. There's never been a list of the 10 blackest white people in America that I haven't been on for some reason. And Bill Clinton, some people do say that. I think it's a matter of pride with him. But at any rate, she is now, despite of all of this, she's the front runner for the Democratic nomination. She's winning in literally every poll. I know early polls don't matter much. She has the highest approval rating of any of the presidential candidates from either party. So,
but here's
they've won it pretty good.
You're probably right on this, James. But here are some of the things that might come up again. Forget about Whitewater, okay? But we can talk about the clip where the Republicans say, you know, I was dead broke after we left the White House. We can talk about dodging sniper fire over in
That was a
Bosnia.
mistake. That literally, and now the new thing is, you know, yes, that was a mistake. She was an inelegant way to say we were dead broke. They had tremendous earning potential. But that doesn't level, that's not a scandal. That's a kind of inelegant way to say something. The Bosnia thing was a politician recalling something in a more favorable light than it was, or whatever.
I'm thinking that Hillary probably has a chance, more so, not because of this, but because the Republicans really don't seem to have anybody that's that viable that will go up against a Hillary Clinton.
I mean, somewhat, and she's going to have to perform. Look, the presidency, I'm a big admirer of Hillary Clinton. Obviously, I'm supporting her, but I would say this, and the same thing I'd say to anybody. The presidency is hard, and she's going to get a ton of scrutiny, a ton of questions, and people are going to ask her the same thing, and she's got to be ready for them. There's no doubt about that.
Look, there's no doubt, James, that Hillary Clinton or the Clintons are still radioactive. You know, they're a lightning rod for those who love them.
But they're popular.
And for those who don't like
right.
them. And here's a question for you. I was just thinking about this while you were talking. Somebody had to leak out this information on these.
Well, no, we know it. The New York Times said it came from Republican staffers on the Benghazi committee.
You don't think, because there's also been some talk that perhaps somebody else, perhaps John Kerry, who might have aspirations for running for president, might have leaked some of this information out to the New York Times?
I mean, the Times in the second last paragraph noted that the information came from them.
Okay.
Okay. I think they had it, and they in the Times. And by the way, the initial Times story, as usual, the peg for putting it on the front page is that it was potentially illegal. There was no such thing, and they had to walk that back, just like they always have to walk everything back.
You know, this is absolutely amazing. You know, I was talking to my wife the other day. I said, you know, if I was in a back alley brawl, there's two people that I would have on my back. One would be Hillary Clinton. The other would be Nancy Pelosi. They have more testosterone than 99.9% of men that I know.
They're both very, very tough women. And, you know, if you are a woman of that generation and you came up, the world was different when Nancy Pelosi was starting in politics or started out with a career, or Hillary Clinton. You had to be tough to survive. I mean, there's no question about that. And they're schooled and brought up at a different time than a lot of younger women in this country now. That is a fact.
Real quickly before we end here, I can't let you go without talking about some of the other possible Democratic candidates. Of course, I mentioned Kerry, who's not a candidate. We've got Joe Biden, possibly. We've got Elizabeth Warren. Who do you see on the horizon?
Well, I don't think right now, I don't think it'll change. There's no appetite in Democrats for a challenge to Hillary. They're just not. In a poll after poll, I think it was a Wall Street Journal poll, 86% of the Democrats said they could vote for Hillary. They're just not it's tough sledding out there for anybody. And there's a general sense that, you know, she's earned this. She's qualified, she's earned it, and that's where the party is.
But even I would beg to differ only in the sense you have somebody like Biden, that they talk about his mouth, but Biden has a lot of foreign policy experience.
He's a very qualified guy. He's a likable. Democrats they just think that it's Hillary's turn. And they kind of, in essence, the voters are shut down.
Does the country really think that way? You know,
well, the country doesn't pick the Democratic nominee. The Democratic Party picks the Democratic nominee.
And there lies the problem.
Well, the Republican Party picks that nominee. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, look, I tell you what, we've got a long time. I guess it's a long, short time before 2016, and I would suspect that there'll be more surprises along the way.
No, don't suspect. We know. The future is unknowable except for one thing. In U.S. politics, there will be surprises along the way. That I promise you.
James Carville, always a pleasure to have you here on The Rise with You.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Okay, now. Coming up, an ugly truth about America that just doesn't go away. And of course, you're watching The Rise with You.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there that are called tomorrow's people, the highly creative ones who live in the future. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They're bold. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. We've been able to grow our bank to become a leading player in Nigeria with a strong presence across the continent, adopting best practice in everything we do. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Those who shape tomorrow strive for and demand perfection. At Access Bank, our service culture of speedy response and drive for excellence is the blueprint for creating customer experiences that will echo for generations. Come, let's work together and take tomorrow.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms, just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not gonna do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just wanna say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back. Colleges should be a place of enlightenment, but there have been disturbing incidents recently that reveal that on some campuses, racism still hides behind ivy walls. A video emerged from Oklahoma University of students from the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. They used the N-word to describe who would never be let into their chapter. Now, of course, reaction was swift. Demonstrations against the hate speech spread across the campus, and the frat house was shut down, the offending students expelled. The National Organization of SAE issued a condemnation, but by the end of the week, allegations of racism at other chapters, other fraternities, and indeed other colleges were coming out of the woodwork. For example, at the University of Alabama, a student was reportedly expelled for racial slurs. At the University of Maryland, Instagram photos are said to show a birthday cake at a sorority party with a racist word written on it. At the University of Massachusetts, reports of racist graffiti. And at Colgate, there are allegations that students have posted racist comments on social media. Well, joining us from Washington is radio show host and attorney Monique Presley. It's always good to have you here on our show, Monique. Let's start with those frat boys. I guess not exactly surprising. Fraternities and sororities are, after all, rooted in exclusion.
Well, they're rooted in exclusion, yes, but that doesn't mean that any of this behavior is acceptable. I can't say that it's shocking for the majority of people of color because we've been knowing for years and years and decades upon eons that racism hasn't gone anywhere. I think what surprised the most are people of majority who think that people are much further along than they actually are.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Monique, because we look at some of these fraternities and sororities. You well know, as I do. I went to Purdue University. The Greek system is alive and well. It's a good system. We also know that a lot of the executives and corporate Fortune 500 companies come from people who are members of these fraternities. What does that say about where we are in terms of race in this country?
Julian, isn't that the petrifying part of all of it? I've been listening to the discussions and following them. It's not really about these students' right to assemble or their constitutional rights. The nightmare of it all is that these are the young minds that are getting education, they're finishing college, they're going on to graduate school, they're walking into companies, and then it's the racism that we can't see. We think that it's there, but we're not sure because it translates into hiring and firing. It translates into promotion. It translates into job performance. And these are the people who become not just the employees, but very soon the employers. And that's the type of racism that makes for socioeconomic gaps and that, quite frankly, makes for the anger that we see on our streets here in this country today.
Absolutely. I guess it's also a sobering fact at this point, at least recent polls of white teens indicate that the so-called millennials, those born from 2000 on, are not as post-racial as they are believed to be. Researchers say it's not that white millennials are that much more tolerant, it's that they're more apathetic.
And I don't really know why everyone was so excited about those numbers in the first place. They're not much better than prior year statistics for the boomers or for the Gen Xers. We're looking at a difference in 1 or 2 percentage points. And again, these millennials were raised by their parents. They were raised by their environment. So if you're coming up in an environment of people who have very strong racial biases, prejudices, are out and out racist, then that is not going to entirely miss the next generation. This is something that we have to keep digging on and digging in until we get to the root and get it out.
You know, Monique, it's very interesting. I was talking with some folks yesterday at my house. We were talking about the Obama administration and what his legacy may or may not be. And one person said something to me that was quite interesting. He said, you know, I cannot wait until Barack Obama gets out of office. I said, why? He said, because ever since he became president back in 2008, race has been at the forefront of almost every issue in this country, even despite the fact that some say, well, you've got a black president now, things are different. But I thought about that and I said, my God, this is so true.
Well, that's the very reason that I'm grieving the fact that the president is going to be out of office soon, because race needs to be at the forefront, because we're finding out that it's on the underbelly anyway. It's right there among us. The fact that we have the first African-American president, I think, did help to bring the issue to the forefront and to bring all of the hidden and latent biases to the fore. People's true opinions started to show, not just in regard to the president, but in regard to how we live our daily lives, how we work, how we assemble in church and in business and in community. And it's a necessary conversation. So I understand what your friend meant, but I guess I have the opposite point of view on what it'll mean going forward.
Well, you know, the whole race, that there's a wound that has never been healed. There may have been a scab, but the scab is continuing to be picked. I hate to be that graphic on it, but, you know, of course, when we see this, racism is not limited to college students at all, or college campuses. Now, you know about this story recently that hit a host on the Spanish TV station Univision said Michelle Obama looked like she was from the movie Planet of the Apes, inferring America's first lady looked like an ape or a chimpanzee. That's what it seemed to be inferred. The host was fired. And of course, there's Ferguson, Missouri, where the Justice Department found numerous incidents of racism. It's all over the place.
And can you imagine? These are the stories where people were actually either brazen enough or foolish enough or asleep at the wheel enough to actually say it out loud or to get caught on camera. What does that say about what's really happening behind the scenes? We can't govern what goes on in people's homes, Julian, so that's why we have laws in place. But I think what this shows us is that no matter how many laws we fight for and how many times we change the book, it doesn't govern thinking and it doesn't govern hearts. There has to be a real work done in this country in order to change what is the root of the problem.
Okay, and we'll have to leave it at that word. Monique Presley, as always, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
All right. We have a lot more still ahead, so stay with us. Arise Review. We'll be right back.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world. As we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years in the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
If I was to build my own news network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city.
Shahana Bhatt, Arise News, New Delhi.
Karim Gamaluddin, Arise News, Cairo.
Dale McEwen, Arise News, Karagosk.
James Blue, Arise News, Addis Ababa.
Ronnie Carville, Arise News, São Paulo, Brazil.
We give them different angles on stories so they can get a different perspective of the people that they are looking at.
It's hard to pin down the exact number of Syrian refugees who have streamed across the border into Lebanon.
They stormed a media room in one of the hotels in Kuala Lumpur, holding placards reading, "Tell us the truth and return our families back to us."
Anchors and reporters that have covered wars, have covered disasters, have covered government shutdowns. There's nothing almost that this team hasn't experienced.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Well, the Prime Minister of Israel could be on the edge of a major setback. The latest polls in advance of Tuesday's election show Benjamin Netanyahu could lose power, or at least seats in parliament. While his controversial speech to the American Congress may have been timed for maximum effect back home, it may not be having the effect Netanyahu was hoping for. Instead, the Zionist Union Party, led by Yitzhak Herzog, seems to be gaining ground. In Tel Aviv is Jacob Wirtschafter, an Arise News contributor who covers the region from Tel Aviv and Cairo. Jacob, of course, it's good to see you on Arise Review. Is this case of Netanyahu fatigue, or do Israelis just want someone new?
I think what's happened here is that the economy has come to the forefront of people's minds. Even during the Gaza war this summer, people were really focused on the price of housing. And the Likud campaign, which has tried to focus the public's attention on security issues like Iran and the difficulty in coming to some sort of an agreement with the Palestinians, just hasn't captured the public's imagination the way that ongoing concern with the high cost of living has worried Israelis.
You know, Jacob, it seems like the economy is first and foremost in most people's minds what it affects them most. But Israel, some would say, probably is a little bit different in the fact that they're surrounded by millions of people who are bent on their destruction, Iran being one of them. They've publicly said this many times. And of course, the narrative in the United States has been as such, that this is a really big deal. Negotiating with Iran would be a losing proposition. So one would think that the talks between Iran and the P15 countries would be front and center in the minds and hearts of Israelis.
So there's Bibi fatigue, but there's also Iran fatigue. I mean, Israelis have been told that Iran is an existential threat, and they believe that it's an existential threat. But they also don't like the notion, and we've got poll numbers showing that about 58% of Israelis don't like the notion that somehow the timing of this speech, the way it was organized behind President Obama's back, has somehow impinged on the key relationship with the United States. People here are aware of Susan Rice's comments that this had deep political damage, and they don't like the notion that there's been some sort of a rift either with the Democratic Party, with the American Jewish community, or frankly speaking, Julian, with the African American Democrats that also didn't go to Netanyahu's speech. They want to see a healthy bipartisan relationship with the United States, and they want to see security matters handled between the United States intelligence agencies and the United States political and diplomatic leadership, and the diplomatic and security relevant agencies here.
So, you know, again, the economy obviously in Israel, as many parts of the world, is front and center. But it seems, though, from what you're saying, Jacob, that Netanyahu's friction with President Obama, and of course coming to address the joint session of Congress here, was probably perhaps a little bit more than a chink in his armor. It may cost him some votes.
Yes, and again, you know, we have to be clear about the nuance here. Obama is not popular in Israel, just like he's not really popular in Egypt or in Jordan or in Syria. I mean, people, to the extent that he's the president of the United States and represents America, people in this part of the Middle East see a lack of American engagement. And of course, the big vacuum that we've talked about before is Syria, and ISIS is in there, and the whole region is freaking out about it. So it's not that people are making some kind of choice here between Netanyahu and Obama, but they're making a choice about their own future. They want a future of hope. They want to see negotiations at least tried with Iran. And they want to see a government that is engaged with trying to solve their own day-to-day economic and social welfare issues.
And Jacob, I think it's good to note also, there's one other thing there. When they talk about economy, we're also talking about money. The United States is still the biggest supporter of Israel, pouring in billions of dollars a year. I'm sure that hasn't gone past many people in Israel.
Of course, people here know that. The other thing you should know is that the economy here has changed radically over the course of the past decade and a half. You know about Startup Nation. 50% of Israel's exports now are in high tech. That part of the economy, excuse me, a small bug just flew into my mouth. But that part of the economy, the high tech part of the economy, is only generating about 10% of the jobs here. So the government has to figure out how to include the sectors that haven't been engaged with a high-tech economy, and how, yes, to move Israel off of so much foreign support.
Well, Jacob, I'm glad you ingested a little bit of protein before your segment is over, but we've run out of time, and it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for your insight. Okay. Coming up next on Arise, we're full of surprises here. We'll check in on the upcoming presidential election in Nigeria. Stay with us.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, and not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
If I were to build my own news network, it would certainly have to reflect a diversity of culture, because that's the global situation, that's the global reality.
I would probably bring a lot of personal stories, really personal stories from the leaders of all countries.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
Arise News, every culture, every angle. Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, it's once again down to the wire in Nigeria. The postponed elections are set for March 28th, and there's plenty to talk about. Nigeria's newspaper This Day reports that the Islamic State is welcoming Boko Haram into its declared caliphate. That has religious as well as strategic significance for jihadists in West Africa. As we have reported, soldiers from throughout the region are engaged in the fight against the terror group, and now we're learning that foreign mercenaries are part of the effort as well. Well, Rise News correspondent Sarah Firth is in Lagos with the latest. Sarah, is the government of Nigeria acknowledging that it's paying foreign soldiers?
Well, the Nigerian government has acknowledged this foreign military presence in Nigeria, but it refers to it as foreign contractors. Now, the government spokesperson's come out and said that it's not engaging in any back channels or illegal recruitment. But in an interview, President Goodluck Jonathan saying there were 2 companies that were being used, but what they're doing is providing, they say, technical and training. So that's the kind of remit that the Nigerian government is saying that these foreign military presence is engaged in. Now, the story first started about a week or so ago when photos emerged online on social media appearing to show this foreign military presence up in the northeast in Maiduguri. And so now you've got that confirmation, but as we said, it's extremely unclear exactly what the scope of their involvement in this counterinsurgency operation involves. The Nigerian government standing firm that this is just a technical and training role.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that. And the situation there, of course, certainly is still fluid, as you're reporting. I would assume, though, there's got to be a lot of concern amongst Nigerians over this link, this possible link between Boko Haram and the Islamic State, or ISIL, as many is calling it.
I mean, there's huge concern around the fact that you've had Boko Haram pledging allegiance to the so-called Islamic State, and the fact that you've then had the so-called Islamic State accepting that pledge of allegiance. In terms of how that's played out here on the ground, I don't think in security circles there's any particular concern about the practical involvement of Islamic State fighters. This is far much more being seen as a propaganda coup. For both sides, really. Boko Haram's often been the much lesser reported of the jihadist movements. It's been the Islamic State that's really engaged in this social media presence and this propaganda push. They've been much more successful at Boko Haram than Boko Haram. And so for Boko Haram, this is really their moment in the international spotlight. You've got the Nigerian elections coming up. You've had this major counterinsurgency pushback. So it makes sense for the Islamic State to capitalize on that. But in terms of the strength of any real links between the two groups, that remains extremely unclear.
Sarah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention anything about or an update on those schoolgirls that have been missing now for quite some time. Of course, President Goodluck Jonathan said that those girls would be rescued. Does anybody there believe that these girls will ever be found?
I mean, there's huge concern around that. It's been almost a year, and of course, no real developments. And at the same time, you've had this major pushback. You've had the Nigerian elections postponed whilst the security situation in the northeast, they're trying to resolve it. So you have almost daily updates of these claims of territorial successes and the pushback against Boko Haram. But you're absolutely right. There's still territory that hasn't been taken back and still very little information about the whereabouts of these girls. And I think as you come up to that year marker, the fact that there hasn't been or been seen to be any significant development in their retrieval, in their rescue, I think obviously huge concern. And when you talk to the groups that have been involved in trying to push the government to get those girls back, it's pretty heartbreaking stuff, actually. At the time the girls were kidnapped, this obviously gained huge international attention, and unfortunately, as the way these things often go, it sort of falls out of international headlines. And of course, for the families and relatives of these girls, that fight is still very much at the centre of their minds. It's something that they constantly are calling on the government to be working on. And as we've said, as yet, no major developments on their return.
And of course, we're talking about, and we mentioned the elections now are front and center, happening this time after being postponed on March 28th. What is happening now in Nigeria in advance of the elections on both sides, on Goodluck Jonathan's side and also on Buhari's side?
Well, it's certainly ramping back up again. It's not long to go now till that rescheduled March 28th date. There's still a question mark here in Nigeria over whether or not the elections will take place on that date. And as we said, you know, that initial postponement period, that 6-week period, predominantly around the security situation in the northeast of the country. Is the Nigerian military going to be able to deliver and make good on those promises made by very high levels that the situation in the northeast will be significantly advanced and secure enough to have justified that 6-week postponement? And it remains extremely unclear, although they've had these big territorial successes in taking territory back from Boko Haram. The challenge, of course, is going to be keeping those areas under government control, keeping them secure, and also convincing some of the huge numbers that have fled those areas to return. So there are a lot of unknowns here still, despite the assurances that are being made. And it's not long to go until that March 28th date. So again, we find ourselves in a position coming very, very close to the election date with some very big unanswered questions. And we saw what happened the last time that was the case.
Sarah Firth reporting live from Lagos. Sarah, as always, thank you. Here's one more story with a Nigerian connection. The pastor of an international church, his offices there, is asking for contributions so he can buy, get this, a private jet. Reverend Creflo Dollar is based in Atlanta, Georgia. His World Changers Church promises earthly riches to the faithful. And the Reverend says he needs a $65 million jet to spread the word. Every year, poachers reportedly kill tens of thousands of African elephants. The magnificent animals are killed for their tusks. To discourage the ivory trade and to mark World Wildlife Day in Kenya, 15 tons of confiscated elephant tusks were burned to cinders. And setting the giant bonfire, President Kenyatta was dramatically showing that in order to save the elephants, his country is willing to destroy all illegal ivory. Well, Kathleen Garrigan is with the Africa Wildlife Foundation. Welcome to Arise Review.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Do bonfires like this actually help reduce poaching, or do they just drive up the price of ivory, making it even more lucrative trade?
I think the price of ivory does well on its own, being driven up. I mean, it's being driven largely by growing affluence in Asia, more people having disposable income, and ivory, as we know, is a coveted product, and more people are able to buy it. So that's really driving up the price of ivory. With regard to reducing poaching, certainly it's a very dramatic public statement by the Kenyan government, and it's certainly to be commended. But it alone, just destroying ivory alone, will not end the battle on the front lines. It will not reduce poaching on its own. It needs to be followed up with a suite of commitments, both externally and internally, to combat wildlife crime.
Indeed, it would be. You know, I guess the other question is, I mean, this is probably a rhetorical question, but what is driving the illegal market?
It's really demand in prominent ivory markets. I mean, China, for sure, is the largest ivory market in the world. There, you know, for centuries, ivory has been a coveted product. It's conveys a sense of status and luxury, and as affluence in that country grows, and in other countries as it grows, more and more people are able to buy these products. And so as they fly off the shelves, so goes the market for ivory. It continues to go up.
You know, maybe there needs to be a little bit more education here. Studies show that many Chinese have a lot of wrong information about tusks. For example, some 70% think that tusks are like fingernails and just regrow.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. We and our partners did some surveys a couple of years back and found exactly that. People were not associating the ivory bangle or the beautiful ivory carving that they wanted or intended to buy with a dead elephant, with a poached elephant. You know, many people thought it was a tooth and it fell out, and the elephant continued on, and the ivory just went to the market. But increasingly, with over the years, we've had a number of public awareness campaigns with our partner Wild Aid and Save the Elephants, and with the help of a lot of celebrities like Yao Ming and Li Bingbing, and slowly we're starting to see that change. You know, recent surveys suggest that people are more aware of the elephant poaching problem in Africa and are connecting it, linking it with ivory trade and demand for ivory in their country and in others.
And look, we'll also be talking about the elephants themselves here. They seem to be pretty similar to humans in many ways. For example, they feel grief. They say even pigs also have that same kind of intelligence to a certain degree here. We could talk a lot about that, but let's talk about the fight against these poachers here. Now, we understand the poachers are using helicopters and AK-47s, which means there's a lot of money involved with this ivory collecting here. The question is, Kathleen, are the poachers better equipped than the game wardens?
I think, yes, better equipped and outmanned. I mean, our game rangers are doing a wonderful job. They are on the front lines of this war. But essentially they are under-supported, under-equipped, undermanned, and you do have well-financed, well-coordinated poachers operating. But you also, it's a highly militarized operation. But you also have, on the other end of the spectrum, poachers just using spears and just using very low-tech weapons. So everyone's really in on this game because of how lucrative it is and how low risk it is, even when you get caught.
Yeah, and you're wondering also, Kathleen, about the Kenyan government, because only 5% of poachers are prosecuted in Kenya. And of course, we're talking about 35,000 elephants are killed in about a year. That's a staggering number. I mean, anything that can be done about this?
Yeah, I think you point to a good point. I mean, it's not enough really to just light a fire and destroy ivory. That really has to be followed up with a stronger law enforcement commitment. And it really can't just be about going after poachers. I mean, certainly that's one part of it. But we really need to see the political will behind, you know, Kenya's government, Tanzania's government, China's government, the U.S. government, to really go after the middlemen and the kingpins, the ones that are well protected, because really when you take them out of the chain, it has a cascade effect all the way down to the bottom where the poachers are, because you can take one poacher out of the field, but there's, you know, many more behind him willing to take his place.
Right, of course.
So really...
Yeah, the photographs are indeed horrifying. I hope, and a lot of people hope that something has been done. Kathleen Garrigan, thank you for being at the forefront of this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. It could be the biggest boxing match in decades, thank goodness. Andrew Rosario's Sports Review is coming up next. Stay with us.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can. Here at Arise America, we want to bring you news from a different perspective, and not just news, but analysis as well. So let me ask you this. What is the realistic possibility of an inmate dying during one of these cell extractions?
Well, there have been many cases in which inmates have died through asphyxiation, through seizures, etc.
Now you have this little thumb drive, and you're using it, and now the Trojan horse sits in your computer. So you decide to go on some website, you decide to buy something. I've got now access to your bank, your credit card information, all your personal information.
You never are paid what you are needed. You are paid what you are able to deliver.
Acting as if the workplace
is never going to be
You're
worth
acting as if the
$22.
workplace today is the way it was when Debbie and I, and maybe you, I don't know, maybe that was a different generation, not sure, were coming up.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
One of the great things about Arise Entertainment 360 is we have this Arise to Your Health segment, which really focuses on the holistic approach of being healthy. So we do everything from working out to juicing to getting in shape by doing fun exercises like bouncing on a trampoline or wearing these bouncy boots on our feet when we're jumping all over the set. We've done karate, we've danced the weight off, we've done just about everything. And of course, I love when we eat on set, but we do it in a very healthy and clean way.
We're delighted to introduce a new segment for Arise Review with an old friend of the program. Andrew Rosario is here with Sports Review. Andrew, your first story is about the big fight, a fight many say is more than 5 years too late.
Yeah, Julian, but it's finally going to happen. Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao will step into the ring on Saturday, May 2nd at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. They met the media for the first time at a red carpet event last Wednesday in Los Angeles. Mayweather will take his undefeated record at 47-0 against Pacquiao, 57-5, who has won championships in 8 different classes. Both camps are to blame for the fight not happening sooner. Some blame promoter Bob Arum, who has held a grudge against Mayweather since they parted ways after his contract expired. Some blame Pacquiao for not adhering to the drug testing Mayweather proposed. This fight is expected to be the highest revenue-generated sporting event in history. For folks at home, expect to shell out at least $100 for pay-per-view. If you're lucky to attend the fight, the cheapest ticket will cost you $1,000, with ringside seats going for at least $5 grand. Both fighters are expected to make close to $200 million after pay-per-view and ticket sales. Julian, I think we're in the wrong business. Tickets to the fight were sold out in 15 minutes after the match was confirmed. The fight is so big, MGM is not comping tickets to even the A-list crowd. Boxing pundits have expressed their opinion on who they think will win and who has the most to lose should they come out on the wrong end of the decision. Rarely do sporting events of this magnitude live up to the hype. Until this last Super Bowl, previous games turned out to be a dud. Something tells me this fight will live up to the hype. Boxing badly needs it to be because both the MMA and the UFC have been stealing their thunder from boxing. On May 2nd in Las Vegas, the world will tune in to watch a match that should have taken place at least 5 years ago.
Look, I don't know if I'm going to spend $100 on pay-per-view, but
Yes,
I got to
you
tell
will.
you, well, no, I'm not spending that kind of money. But, you know, the usual shenanigans in boxing, obviously, that a lot of us have missed since we haven't been watching this, and UFC and MMA have picking up a whole lot of stuff here. But I've got to ask you, all that set aside, who do you think is going to win this fight?
You know, they say that styles make fights, and these two guys, Pacquiao is the kind of guy that is the aggressor. He's coming at you, throwing a lot of punches per round, whereas Floyd is more of a defensive fighter, a counter puncher. It's going to be very interesting. I'll save my prediction for later on.
Okay, well, I'm going for the people's champ, Pacquiao. I don't back down from that.
Okay.
Anyway, for most of us, the cities on the east coast of the U.S., it's been a brutal winter, but it has been an especially sad winter for Chicago baseball fans as they have lost 2 revered icons.
Yeah, Julian, very sad news for baseball fans, especially in Chicago. In January, legendary shortstop first baseman Ernie Banks passed away. And then earlier this month, Mr. White Sox, Minnie Minoso, joined Ernie in baseball heaven. Both men were more than first players of color for their respective teams. Banks, a black man, and Minoso, a black Cuban, were the hearts and souls of their teams. Both had great careers. Banks, a 14-time All-Star, hit 512 home runs and was voted league MVP 2 straight years, 1958 and 1959. Minoso was a 9-time All-Star and won 3 Golden Glove awards. Although neither would lead their teams to a World Series, they made their team contenders every year. So we say goodbye to Mr. Cub Ernie Banks, who coined the term "Let's Play 2, and Minnie Minoso, the Cuban Comet. Some suggested that every major league team play a doubleheader this year to honor Banks. I say let's play 2 in honor of both of them.
Absolutely. You know, a lot of people obviously in this country know more about Ernie Banks, Mr. Cub.
Right.
But Minoso, a lot of people perhaps don't really know who he is or really what he was about.
Yeah, that's true. But in Chicago, they knew who he was. And again, being the first black Cuban to play for the White Sox, he brought a lot of Cuban baseball players after him.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I mean, he's the first of many that have come here, and of course, people know all too well about specifically two countries. Oh, I could say three: Puerto Rico, of course, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Big time baseball.
Yes, big time. Louis Tiant is one of them.
That's right. I forgot about him.
The list goes on and on for the number of Cuban players that made an impact on the major leagues.
What do you think else could be done to get people more aware of the contributions of Minoso specifically?
I think that falls on Major League Baseball. They need to start promoting not only the Cuban baseball players, but even the African-American baseball players. The number of African-American baseball players is dwindling year by year.
What is the reason for it? Because they're talking about, well, they don't have the resources, they don't have playing fields. We never had playing fields. They were sandlot fields in the city. Nothing has changed. So what do you think is
the popularity of basketball and football? That's the number one reason why there's been a decline in the African-American players in the major leagues.
And I guess this whole thing with the Little League scandal now that happened in Chicago is probably perhaps not helping.
It's not helping any either. But again, I go back to Major League Baseball doing a better job of promoting during the regular season, in the off season, and making sure that the African-American players and even the Cuban players, the Hispanic players, get the type of publicity that they deserve.
But actually, though, there's still a lot of Hispanic players in the major leagues.
Yeah, Major League Baseball right now, they're opening up camps in the Dominican Republic for the baseball players. They're teaching them not only to play baseball, but they're teaching them how to speak English, so that when they do get drafted, when they do come to the United States, they'll be able to mingle with the other players as well as the media.
All right, well, great job, and great for you being here, part of Review Now with your own little segment, sir. Moving on up there,
trying to get like you.
Oh, well, please. Okay. Andrew, thanks so much. And thank you for joining us on Arise Review. You can keep in touch with all Arise programs on Facebook. I'm Julian Phillips. Have a great, productive, and wonderful week.